Have you noticed how much your electric bill is going up? And this price hike is only the beginning. There's something else that's going to send your electric bill skyrocketing even further. We're going to look at the reason why. It's like a juiced up new version of one of the most infamous scams of the last century. Remember Enron?
Looking at Enron, it started with a lot of people who thought they were changing the world, and over time they became victims of their own hubris, victims of their own greed.
This company was fixated on a massive public relations campaign to convince the investment community that they were new, different, innovative, almost heralding a new era.
We are the good guys. We were on the side of angels.
It was a massive fraud of enormous proportions. It has evolved to the corporate crime of the century.
We're talking about a commodity that normally trades in the $35 to $45 range. High prices are when it gets in the 50s or $1,000.
So many of them were blinded by the money that they didn't see that they were sinking their own lifeboat.
It wasn't clear from Enron's financial statements that there was fraud here, but what was clear is that something didn't add up.
I've thought about this, and it couldn't have just been a few executives at Enron that made this happen. There had to have been complicity across the board because it was all too easy.
The analysts weren't analyzing at all. They were willing to believe virtually anything Enron told them.
Leading U.S. financial institutions not only took part in Enron's deceptive practices, but at times designed, advanced, and profited from them.
The Enron fraud is the story of synergistic corruption. There are supposed to be checks and balances in the system. The lawyers are supposed to say no. The accountants are supposed to say no. The bankers are supposed to say no, but no one who was supposed to say no said no. They all took their share of the money from the fraud and put it in their pockets.
Enron paid its advisors well.
Everyone had their hand out at the table. They were all being paid.
Enron should not be viewed as an aberration, something that can't happen anywhere else, because it's all about the rationalization that you're not doing anything wrong. We've involved Arthur Andersen, we've involved the lawyers, the bankers know what we're doing. There's a sense, the diffusion of responsibility. Everyone was on the bandwagon, and it can happen again.
I think it's happening all over again in a new form. There are many parallels between the ways Enron ripped off their customers and shareholders and what's happening to your electric bill. And it shouldn't be a surprise since some of the people at the top of this scam were actually executives at Enron during that scam. Their early careers gave them master classes in crony capitalism as they did the bidding of crooked bosses like Jeff Skilling, Ken Lay, and Lou Pye. And they've been working to create a new energy gold mine for themselves, much like Enron, offshore wind farms. Offshore wind is what I see as Enron 2.0, the Enron of our day. It's a gold mine that developers want you to pay for. And by the time you find out that the state of Maine has bought fool's gold, the architects of these deals plan to be far, far away with your money, while you try to pick up the pieces of a once vibrant economy. The only thing green about these industrial complexes is the amount of green the owners are going to fleece you for. In the end, offshore wind will cost you more than you can imagine. Did you know that back in the 90s, Enron was one of the very first major American companies to get onto the green energy bandwagon?
You know when you work for Enron, you're going to see the newest thinking. You're going to see the newest markets opening up.
Back in '97, the American Wind Energy Association was giddy about Enron's acquisition of Zond Corp, a California wind developer and manufacturer. That same AWEA has been equally giddy about the power players looking to scoop up the Gulf of Maine for offshore wind. And one of several nonprofit organizations set up in Maine by movers and shakers in wind power, the Maine Renewable Energy Association, according to the About page on their website, leads the local and statewide policy debate on renewable energy generation in Maine and works to ensure its efforts are united with those of its member companies. And who are their member companies? Most of these are heavily subsidized wind grifters from around the country, even from around the world, looking for new ground to exploit. And the MREA is a vehicle to consolidate their efforts to gobble up Maine. They've already put in land-based wind turbines in most of the areas that they could, but they need to keep that money coming. They'd launch wind turbines off into space if the government would pay them to do it, but for now they're settling for filling our oceans with them. One of the biggest founding partners of the MREA has been scrubbed from their website, but if you go back a few years into the Wayback Machine, you'll see a corporation called First Wind was right at the top of their list. What does that have to do with Enron? Well, after the Enron bankruptcy, when Enron Wind's assets were bought up by GE, Enron Wind cohorts decided to keep up their work in this lucrative field they were pioneering. But they needed a new name. They came up with the name First Wind. And so here were Enron bigwigs Steve Vavrick, Michael Alvarez, and Paul Gaynor leading the local and statewide policy debate on renewable energy generation in Maine right from the very beginning. So why have Enron types set their sights on Maine of all places? Well, Maine probably looks to wind developers the way India looked to Enron in the mid-90s. A faraway place that's ripe for exploitation, if you can promise them the moon.
But in other places in the world, in India, great quarter and great year in India. Phase 1 of Dabhol is in operation, generating power. Phase 2 is financed and is under construction.
They built this power plant in India. Nobody else would do that at the time. They were terrified of investing in India. Enron did it, and did it in a big way.
Now, Dabhol is a ruin. Though it lost $1 billion on the project, Enron paid out multi-million-dollar bonuses to executives based on imaginary profits that never arrived.
What was the mechanism that Enron used to take India to the cleaners? They used something called a corporate PPA, Power Purchase Agreement. And it's simple. Your citizens pay now for the power that might someday exist, and the companies brokering the deal get to charge you an exorbitant markup for all of their development expenses. As one Indian author wrote in an article examining the consequences of Enron's PPAs in India, a high-cost power regime benefits the private investors who are putting up the plants, the equipment manufacturers who can gold-plate their equipment, and those in power who decide the cost that the boards will pay for the electricity produced. The only losers are the consumers. So it should come as no surprise that the offshore wind corporations who have been wining and dining Maine leaders are insisting on the same thing. Listen to Diamond Offshore Wind CEO Chris Wisman lead the discussion on PPAs.
I'm Chris Wisman, CEO of Diamond Offshore Wind. Diamond Offshore Wind is part of the Mitsubishi Corporation family of companies. Now, there's a couple of primary challenges, right? I mean, just like offshore wind exhibited early on, it is cost, right? Floating offshore wind, the costs are rather uncertain. I think we all expect it to follow a cost curve very similar to fixed foundations, right? That 70% reduction as the industry scaled up. But to the point I think that was raised by Eric earlier, we need more projects to really move the costs down, and that means PPAs, right? Once you get a PPA, then you start getting real investment to get floating offshore wind started.
On the state side, I've heard PPAs. We can't really move without those. And so hopefully a lot of the states are thinking about moving forward here. We got to get some PPAs going on the floating space.
You're not buying real existing energy at a fair market price. You're buying potential future energy which might deliver on your expectations. Everything is hypothetical and blurry enough for unethical people to rip you off. And cost overruns and additional unforeseen surcharges are par for the course. This is how Enron operated. They loved to deal in hypothetical commodities.
This is the key. We're going to move from mark-to-market accounting to something I call HFV, Hypothetical Future Value Accounting.
Whoa!
If we do that, we can add $1 gazillion to the bottom line.
Whoa, Jeff!
Barbara Durkin, who's analyzed the propositions of offshore wind developers such as Deepwater Wind, had a great insight. Could, would, should, may, might, and will are the language of hypothetical future value accountancy used by Enron.
Mark-to-market accounting allowed Enron to book potential future profits on the very day a deal was signed. No matter how little cash actually came in the door, to the outside world, Enron's profits could be whatever Enron said they were.
very subjective and it left it open to manipulation.
And they were saying that we're going to sell power out of this power plant in 10 years for X dollars per kilowatt. And there was no way anybody could prove that they could do it.
And it shouldn't be a surprise that Chris Wissman's ventures all rely heavily on this approach, since he himself is a former high-level executive from Enron, who has floated to the top of Maine's offshore wind deals in the last few years. When you remember some of the specific activities he presided over during his tenure at Enron, you may well wonder why any university or state official would want to partner with this guy and turn your money and natural resources over to him. Diamond Offshore Wind isn't Wissman's first rodeo. He spent some time at the aforementioned wind swindle Deepwater Wind, who gave us the infamous Block Island wind farm. If we evaluate the quality and success of their project as measured by the consumers, the results of Block Island have been abysmal to say the least. Highly expensive and a terrible return on the investment. It's not uncommon for 4 of the 5 turbines to stop working for weeks or months at a time. The underwater cables became exposed almost immediately after installation, and the cost of reburying them has been shifted to the ratepayers. Talk to folks who have been forced to pay for the Block Island debacle, and most of them have not been happy. The scandal-laden development worked out pretty well for Deepwater Wind, though, and their assets were bought up by Danish state-owned enterprise Ørsted. After such a stunning success, Chris Wissman wasn't satisfied to rest on his laurels from the work he did on the travesty that was the Block Island wind farm. He soon landed on his feet as CEO of Diamond Offshore Wind, one of the 2 companies University of Maine is partnering with to industrialize the Gulf of Maine. Has any of the news coverage you've seen of the Aqua Ventus deal, or the forthcoming research array, mention the fact that an Enron executive is one of the key guys overseeing it?
Our culture is a tough culture. It is a very aggressive culture.
8 million on new deals.
At Enron, no one was more aggressive than the traders.
If I'm on the way to my boss's office to argue about my compensation, and if I step on somebody's throat on the way, that doubles it, well, I'll stomp on the guy's throat.
At this point, you might be thinking, hey, Enron was a huge company. Thousands of people worked for it. They can't all have been equally unethical people. Why single these offshore wind guys out? Maybe they changed their ways from the days of Enron, or maybe they were not personally knowingly involved in illegalities. And that is possible. But I want to look closer at Wissman's record here. From 1998 through 2001, he wasn't merely working for Enron. No, he was vice president of a specific arm of Enron, Enron Energy Services.
There was a guy named Lou Pai, who was a key skilling lieutenant, helped build the trading business in the early years, went on to run Enron's doomed effort called Enron Energy Services.
What was the job of EES as you ran it?
It was to sell energy services to end users, industrial end users.
Lou Pai is the guy that Skilling tapped to run the EES business because this was so important to the company and to Skilling's future. He called Lou Pai my ICBM, and Lou Pai dispatched his enemies with incredible skill.
While Ken Lay was stressing over the corporate jet, EES was headed for a crash landing. Facing $500 million in losses, Lou Pai's top lieutenant, Tom White, wondered how EES could show a profit by the end of the quarter.
A question was asked to Tom White, how is it that we made the numbers? And his answer was one word: California.
It started at noon, rolling across the state. Sacramento, San Francisco, Beverly Hills, Long Beach, San Diego.
26,000 miles of California power lines, enough to circle the earth. But for the second day in a row, not enough electricity for America's largest state and the world's 6th largest economy.
The first thing we heard about this energy crisis is where our lights are going to go off in the middle of winter when we're using half the electricity we normally use during the summer.
The Bay Area got hit by not 1, but 2 rolling blackouts.
We only need 28,000 to 30,000 megawatts in December. We have an installed capacity in California at the time of 45,000 megawatts. Plenty of power to meet our electric demand. Of course, we had blackouts in December.
The people who control California's power grid say once again they're worried about having to black out the northern half of the state.
When the rolling blackout started in California, there was definitely a lot of excitement in the air. It was something new. It was something that hadn't been encountered before. It was, how is this event going to affect the price of power?
Controlled rotating outages are being implemented.
I knew that there was illegality going on. I could feel it, I could smell it, I could sense it, and there was no other explanation. Because the numbers just didn't add up. We had enough power in California. It was never about lack of supply.
California was selected by Enron as the prime place to experiment with this new concept of deregulated electricity.
And once in place, Enron made sure that the joke would be on California.
So this, probably the most infamous division of Enron, was the exact branch that Wisman presided over for 3 years as vice president. Is that a job someone gets and keeps by being an ethical person? Wouldn't you want to do an investigation of some sort before putting a guy who was second in command in this environment during the craziest 3 years of its operations in charge of your public's electricity supply? Not to mention a fragile marine environment.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Hey John, it's Tim. The regulatory's all in a big concern about is we're wheeling power out of California. He just steals money from California to the tune of $1 million.
Can you rephrase that?
Okay, he arbitrages the California market to the tune of $1 million or $2 a day.
An arbitrage opportunity has been defined to me as any opportunity to make abnormal profit. So an abnormal profit would be returns above and beyond the norm. I was told that a good trader is a creative trader, and a creative trader is a trader that can find arbitrage opportunities.
One of those opportunities was called Ricochet.
I'll see you guys. I'm taking mine to the desert.
In the midst of the energy shortages, Enron traders started to export power out of the state. When prices soared, they brought it back in.
This is what they say. What we did was overbook the transmission line we had the rights on and said to California utilities, if you want to use the line, pay us. By the time they agreed to meet our price, rolling blackouts had already hit California, and the price for electricity went through the roof. Did you have any knowledge that this was happening?
The only thing that I'm aware of.
Traders soon discovered that by shutting down power plants, they could create artificial shortages that would push prices even higher.
Hey, this is David up at Enron. There's not much demand for power at all, and if we shut it down, could you bring it back up in 3 or 4 hours?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you just go ahead and shut her down then, if that's okay?
Okay.
When you see 2 or 3 energy companies with 30-35% of their entire capacity down for maintenance on a single day, and as a result, the price of electricity skyrocketing 300 or 400%, and then a week later someone else does it up in Northern California, you begin to believe something's not smelling right here.
I want you guys to get a little creative,
okay,
and come up with a reason to go down.
Like a forced outage type thing.
Right.
Those guys, at the flip of a switch, could just yank the California economy on its leash whenever they wanted to, and they did it, and they did it, and they did it, and they made so much money.
These strategies made some money for Enron, but the real money was made by betting that the price of energy would go up. It did. And the West Coast traders made nearly $2 billion for Enron.
We're talking about a commodity that normally trades in the $35 to $45 range. High prices are when it gets in the 50s or $1,000.
The Enron traders never seem to step back and say, wait, is what we're doing ethical? Is it in our best long-term interests? Does it help us if we totally rape California? Instead, they sought out every loophole they could in order to profit from California's misery.
Temperatures in California are hitting higher than 100 degrees, fueling wildfires and fears that California's strained power grid could once again near collapse.
Burn, baby, burn. That's a beautiful thing.
It's also worth noting the arbitrage connection here because there are new arbitrage opportunities for those industrializing the Gulf of Maine. Offshore wind developers get a unique opportunity to draw revenue from a whole new, artificially created market that would make Enron proud. Because let's remember, Enron was always seeking to divert investors into new markets of Enron's own design where they, Enron, could rewrite the rules to benefit themselves. When Diamond Offshore Wind, or RWE, or any other offshore wind developers operate their wind farms, they will regularly be awarded RECs, Renewable Energy Certificates, or Renewable Energy Credits. There's an article on Vox about how RECs are tricky to figure out, but don't worry, everything's above board. Author David Roberts, who has since left Vox to run his own brand as a green industrial apologist, insists that while REC markets are exceedingly complex, and only the smartest guys in the room really know how they work, you can trust them. They're not like the others. Everyone on board promises that there's no funny business going on here. And the REC is a huge subject, but essentially, through climate policies of recent years, an offshore wind farm gets awarded RECs for generating electricity. They can then engage in trading those RECs with states or private companies, because the RECs allow them to meet their goals of being designated green or clean or carbon neutral. And along the way to that transaction, the offshore wind farm gets a chance at making arbitrage profits. And I'm not putting words in anyone's mouths here. Advocates of the REC system have been putting out the term arbitrage in their material promoting RECs. And it seems like the word arbitrage is to Enron types what a cauldron of bacon grease is to bears. As soon as they get a whiff, they're all making a beeline for it. I went to the EPA webpage on RECs, and they have a link to a page entitled Renewable Energy Certificate Arbitrage. Unfortunately, when I clicked on it, it was a dead link, and the content had apparently been removed. But I found the 2017 version of this missing webpage, which provides some interesting background on what it calls a green power partnership. Once again, PPAs are the key to how the corporations secure this arbitrage. And this is a point that I did not get the first time I listened to the whole PPA discussion. A whole separate revenue stream can be baked into the PPA. So it's more than just your public utility commission buying electricity to sell you. There's a whole other category of commodity here within the deal. RECs. Renewable energy certificates with a fluctuating monetary value are also part of the whole deal. And as far as how everyone makes their profits off these RECs, it's all a little vague, it's all a little nebulous. But one thing has been made clear, the developers will be able to make some serious arbitrage off these RECs. I'm sure we can trust them with that this time around, right?
A top executive at one of America's biggest power companies received a raucous welcome in San Francisco tonight. Protesters heckled Enron CEO Jeffrey Skilling outside and inside during his appearance at the Commonwealth Club. One of the protesters even brought a blueberry pie and delivered it herself.
$132 million is what he made. We have a 50% hike in utility rates.
Consumers in California are angry, and they should be. And if we had anything to do with this, then we are the stupidest people in the world.
If you've been watching the videos in this series up to now, you know all about the floating research array that all of the wind proponents are in a hurry to install in the Gulf of Maine. But is research really the primary purpose of this array? I personally think that we should start calling it an arbitrage array, because renewable energy credits are going to be greasing the palms of all involved parties once this array goes in. Sale of RECs has been designated in LD 336, an act to encourage research to support the Maine offshore wind industry. Side note, is there really a Maine offshore wind industry, or is there an international offshore wind industry that's carving up Maine? It seems to me the wind companies and their consultants and partners have been doing very well without needing any extra encouragement from anyone. You should go read through LD 336. It's not a long bill, but it places your future electricity rates at the mercy of financing the construction and operation of the future floating fantasy land that New England Aqua Ventus is leading the way on. The agreement puts people like Diamond Offshore Wind CEO Chris Wissman in the driver's seat on determining whatever rate hikes will be reasonable for you. By 2030, how much will your electric bill go up? 100%? 200? 500? Maybe 800%? These Enron types have a lot of experience with using their imaginations to maximize those profits. Also of note, Chris Wissman had the imagination to name one of his earlier offshore wind corporations Fisherman's Energy, which is hilarious on multiple levels, but I can see why he changed it. No fisherman wants to be associated with that. One significant aspect of the Enron story was the favors that Ken Lay was able to obtain from his longtime friends, the Bush family, and the implications of a corporation being enabled and assisted by their connections with the Bushes who were in office. I haven't been able to find any such clear public links between the offshore wind developers and those in governance who are advocating for them. If any of these people are coordinating favors back and forth, it's done privately. There's not the same kind of physical evidence trail to look for as there was back in the 90s when the Bush family was sending videotapes with birthday greetings to Ken Lay. So I think the jury is still out on whether or not there is any additional back-channel coordination that we don't know about. There certainly isn't any evidence of such yet. But it sure seems the Mills administration couldn't possibly be any friendlier or more accommodating than they have been to the offshore wind developers.
And we're inviting new offshore wind businesses to invest in our state. We welcome you here.
It seems clear to me that despite some lip service for Maine's historic fishing heritage, Governor Mills and her team have picked offshore wind to be the winners in the Gulf of Maine, and they've picked commercial fisheries to be the losers. I'm not saying the offshore wind development in Maine is nothing more than an Enron-style corporate fraud, because there is much more to the story. It's a really complicated situation, and it's part of a much bigger story that's happening worldwide. It certainly is more than just an Enron scam. But what I hope this video helps explain is my view that the offshore wind push in Maine is at least that. And the entire wind industry is tainted by Enron's legacy. Read an eye-opening article from the Houston Chronicle in 2008, Wind Whispers of Enron. 14 years later, the memory of Enron has faded a bit in the public mind, but these things are all still true. At the bare minimum, the path of offshore wind development in Maine bears all of the hallmarks of the unethical practices of Enron. It's been steered by people who held crucial roles in that organization. And it could have the same devastating consequences in the years down the road when the taxpayers discover how their money has been gambled away. So let's not let it get to that point. Insist that the people who represent you in Maine hold offshore wind corporations accountable for their actions. If you found this presentation helpful, please share it with others.